exciting chapter in the land of Merlin. Today we are reading chapter 16 called Arbasa's Door. And if you remember, in the last two chapters, Rhea and Emerys were walking through the forest and the bird that Emerys had saved would not leave his side, and then they went to Rhea's house. Okay, chapter 16, Arbasa's Door. As Rhea led us out of the deep forest into a nearby clearing, I noticed the sudden brightness of the night sky. Then, as the web of branches fell away, I wondered whether a star might be exploding above us, filling the sky with light. At once I realized that the light came not from a star, nor even from the sky. It came from Rhea's house. From the center of the clearing rose a great oak, mightier than any tree I had ever seen. Its burly branches reached outward and upward from the trunk, so thick that it seemed to be made of several trunks fused together. Set in the midst of those branches, glowing like a giant torch, was an aerial cottage whose beams and walls and windows curled with the twisting limbs. Layers of leaves overlaid the treehouse so that the light radiating from its windows shone through multiple curtains of green. Arbasa! Rhea lifted her arms high as she spoke the name. In response, the branches above her head shimmered just enough to drop a light rain of dew on her upturned face. I watched, my chest feeling warm again, as Rhea approached the base of the tree. Peeling off her snug shoes, which appeared to be made of a leathery type of bark, she stepped into a cup-shaped portion of the massive roots. As she spoke a quiet, swishing phrase, the root gradually closed around her feet, so that she and the tree stood planted together as one single being. Rhea stretched her arms wide and embraced the great trunk, even though she could only reach a tiny portion of the way around. At the same time, one of the tree's enormous branches unfurled like a frond of a fern, wrapping itself over her back to return the embrace. A few moments later, the branch lifted and the root parted. With a creaking sound, the trunk creased, cracked, and opened into a small doorway. Rhea ducked her head and entered. Quen, walking stiffly, slipped in beside her. "Come!" Rhea motioned to me to join her. As I stepped toward the cavern, however, the tree shuddered. The bark-edged doorway began to close. Rhea shouted a sharp command, but the tree ignored her and continued to seal itself. I called out to her, while Treble fluttered his wings nervously. Despite Rhea's protests, the doorway shut tight. Helpless, I stood before the tree. I knew as little about what this meant as I knew what to do about it. But one thing was clear. I had been rejected. No doubt thanks to the troublesome bird on my shoulder. Just then, the trunk creased again. The door reopened. Rhea, her face red from shouting, beckoned to me to come. Glancing uncertainly at the fidgeting bird, I entered the dark cavern. Rhea said nothing. She merely turned and started to climb the spiral stairway within the trunk. I followed, hoping that trouble would not cause any. The gnarled platforms of the stairs grew right out of the inner walls of the trunk, so that the whole stairway smelled as rich and moist as a glade after a rain. After we climbed higher, the stairs grew lighter, revealing intricately carved script that flowed over the inner walls. Thousands of lines of this tightly written script covered the stairwell, as beautiful as it was indecipherable. I wished I could read what was said. At last we reached an open platform. Rhea pushed against a drapery of leaves and entered her house. I came right behind, although Treble gnawed angrily at the leaves when they brushed against his feathers. I found myself standing on a floor of tightly meshed boughs, sturdy yet uneven. A fire burned in the hearth in the middle of the room, so bright that I wondered what fuel could be burning within it. The branches of the great tree curled around us, though they were not as closely woven as the floor, so that the window slats opened in all directions. Every piece of furniture in this one-room house rose out of the branches, as naturally as the branches themselves sprang from the trunk. A low table by the hearth, a pair of simple chairs, a cabinet containing utensils made of carved wood and beeswax, all were produced by living branches twisted into shape. Next to the cabinet, Quen was stirring something. I stepped closer to Rhea. "What happened down there?" Cautiously, she looked from me to the sharp-taloned bird on my shoulder. My friend Arbasa did not want to let you in. That much I could tell. It would only have done that for one reason, to keep out of my home someone who would do me great harm. I felt a new surge of resentment against Trouble. If his presence had almost prevented me from entering Ria's house, might it also prevent me from finding my past, my identity? I wish I'd never met this cursed bird. Ria frowned. Yes, I know. She waved toward Quinn, still bending over the cabinet. Come, let's have some supper. The slim figure poured something that looked like honey over her concoction, a platter of rolled leaves crammed with reddish-brown nuts. The whole thing gave off a hearty, roasted smell. As she carried the platter over to the low table by the hearth, she glanced sharply at Trouble. I have no supper for that vicious beast. For the first time, I realized that Quinn was truly more tree than human. Her skin, gnarled and rigid, looked very much like bark, while her tangled brown hair resembled a mass of vines. Her root-like feet remained unshod, and she wore no adornment but the silver rings on the smallest of her 12 knobby fingers. Beneath her robe of white cloth, her body moved like a tree bending with the wind. Yet her age must have been considerable, for her back bent like a trunk leaning under a winter's weight of snow, and her neck, arms, and legs seemed twisted and frail. Even so, the fragrance of apple blossoms wafted around her, and her recessed brown eyes, shaped like slender teardrops, shone as bright as the fire. Staying clear of me, and especially my passenger, she set down the platter. Her aim was off, however, and she knocked over an oaken flask of water on the table. Curse these old hands! Gwen grabbed the flask and brought it over to the cabinet. As she refilled it, I heard her muttering, "The curse of time, the curse of time." She continued to grumble as she returned it to the table. Ria sat in one of the chairs, indicating with a nod for me to take the other. I watched as she took one of the rolled leaves in her hand. She plunged this into the jar of honey on the platter. She flashed me a slightly guilty smile. A person can never get enough honey. I grinned. Tilting my head toward Gwen, I whispered, "She is not a person like you or me, is she?" Ria looked at me curiously. A person she certainly is, but like us she is not. She is the last survivor of the treelings, a race of part trees, part people. They used to be common in Finkyra, back in the days when giants were the masters of this land. They are gone now, except for Quinn. She stuffed the food, dripping with honey, into her mouth, then reached for the flask of water. After several swallows, she offered it to me. Since by then I had tried some myself and found the rolled leaves so sticky that they were very difficult to chew, I accepted the water gladly. As I replaced the flask on the table, I noticed that the fire, intensely bright though it was, produced no smoke and no heat. In a flash, I understood that this fire was really not a fire at all. Thousands of tiny beetles, pulsing with light of their own making, crawled across a pile of rounded river stones in the center of the hearth. The stones appeared to be their home, for the beetles crawled over and under them continuously, like bees in a hive. While each one of the beetles comprised only a subtle spot of light, collectively they produced a powerful glow which illuminated the entire treehouse. As I finally swallowed the sticky food, Trouble shifted on my shoulder, digging his talons deep into my skin. I cried out, then turned angrily toward him. "Why do you punish me like this? Get off my shoulder, I say! Get off!" Trouble merely stared at me, unblinking. I turned to Ria. "How am I supposed to tame him? Not even the Galator could tame him." Quinn, standing near one of the window slats, stiffened. Caught off guard, I instinctively touched the tunic over my chest, feeling the pendant hanging beneath. Then, realizing what I had done, I did my best to disguise the motion, reaching higher to rub my free shoulder. In a casual voice, I said to Ria, "Wouldn't it be wonderful to find something magical like the Galator? But if I ever did, I wouldn't waste it on the bird. I'd use it to mend my sore body." Ria nodded sympathetically. "Where are you sore?" "My legs, mostly, but I also have this ache between my shoulder blades. It's been with me for as long as I can remember." Her eyebrows lifted, but she remained silent. I somehow had the feeling that she, too, knew more than she was saying. She reached beneath the table and pulled out 2 small silvery blankets, made from the most delicate linen I had ever seen. She spread one over her thighs, then handed the other to me. A good night's sleep will help. I held the shimmering blanket up to the light. What is this cloth? It is silk made by moths. Moths? You're joking. She smiled. Their silk is just as warm as it is light. Try it yourself. Keeping a safe distance from the hawk, Quen approached. Would a song be soothing to you? Please, Rhea answered. It reminds me of all the times you sang to me when I was small. Quen nodded, her teardrop eyes expressionless. I will sing you a song that used to help you sleep. As she passed a thin hand over the glowing beetles, their light dimmed. Then, like an old tree weaving in the wind, Quen began to project a rolling, vibrating sound. It swelled and faded, repeating a comforting pattern over and over again. Almost a voice, yet not quite a voice. The sound wound wordlessly around us, coaxing us to relax, to let go. I pulled the blanket over my chest and leaned back in the chair, my eyes feeling heavy. Rhea, I could tell, was already asleep, and even Trouble's head had dropped low on his chest. I watched Quen's flowing motions for a while, but it was not long before I too drifted into slumber. I dreamed that I lay alone, fast asleep, in a dark forest. Tall trees surrounded me, weaving in the wind. Honey from somewhere dripped into my mouth. Then, all at once, enemies appeared. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. They were hiding in the trees, or perhaps they were the trees themselves. Worst yet, as hard as I tried, I couldn't wake up, or even to protect myself. Slowly, one of the thin, twisted trees nearby bent down over my sleeping form, slipping a finger-like branch into my tunic. The Galator. It wants the Galator. With a supreme effort, I managed to rouse myself. I was still sitting in the chair by the dimly glowing hearth. The silk blanket had fallen to the floor beside me. I reached for the Galator, and to my relief, felt it was still there under my tunic. Listening, I heard the sporadic chattering of birds outside, telling me that sunrise was an hour or so away. Rhea slept, curled as tight as a ball in her chair, while Quen lay snoring on the floor by the cabinet. Trouble sat on my shoulder, his yellow-rimmed eyes wide open. I wondered whether Arbasa itself ever slept. Even now, as it held up its arms, was it still watching the hawk with concern? I wished I could ask the great tree whether Finkyra held the answers to my questions. Had the time come to leave Druma Wood and explore other parts of this island? Or should I be building a boat to search for another place entirely? I sighed, for I knew once again, in that hour before dawn, how little I really did know. Okay, that was chapter 15, and tomorrow we will read chapter 16, called The Alea Bird. Bye!